Jewish religious movements, sometimes called denominations or branches, include different groups which have developed among Jews from ancient times. Today, the main division is between the Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative lines, with several smaller movements alongside them. This threefold denominational structure is mainly present in the United States, while in Israel the fault lines are between the religious Orthodox and the non-religious. The movements share common values such as monotheism, charity, and Klal Yisrael. These Jewish values are the basis for cooperation and interplay among the various movements. They also share a recognition that the Tanakh and other Jewish spiritual writings such as Talmud are central to Jewish experience. However, they differ in their approach to such texts. The movements differ in their views on various religious issues. These issues include the level of observance, the methodology for interpreting and understanding Jewish law, biblical authorship, textual criticism, and the nature or role of the Messiah. Across these movements, there are marked differences in liturgy, especially in the language in which services are conducted, with the more traditional movements emphasizing Hebrew. The sharpest theological division occurs between Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews who adhere to other denominations, such that the non-Orthodox movements are sometimes referred to collectively as the liberal denominations, or progressive streams terminology. Some Jews reject the term denomination as a label for different groups and ideologies within Judaism, arguing that the notion of denomination has a specifically Christian resonance that does not translate easily into the Jewish context. However, in recent years the American Jewish Yearbook has adopted denomination, as have many scholars and theologians. Other commonly used terms are movements, branches, trends, streams, or even flavors of Judaism. This article uses the terms interchangeably, without purporting to affirm the validity of one term over another. The Jewish denominations themselves reject characterization as sects. Sects are traditionally defined as religious subgroups that have broken off from the main body, and this separation usually becomes irreparable over time. Within Judaism, individuals and families often switch affiliation, and individuals are free to marry one another. Although the major denominations disagree on who is a Jew, it is not unusual for clergy and Jewish educators trained in one of the liberal denominations to serve in another, and left with no choice. Many small Jewish communities combine elements of several movements to achieve a viable level of membership. Relationships between Jewish religious movements are varied. They are sometimes marked by interdenominational cooperation outside of the realm of halakha, and sometimes not. Some of the movements sometimes cooperate by uniting with one another in community federations and in campus organizations such as the Hillel Foundation. Jewish religious denominations are distinct from, but often linked to, Jewish ethnic divisions and Jewish political movements. Judaism and Samaritans. The Samaritans regard themselves as direct descendants of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh in the northern kingdom of Israel, which was conquered by Assyria in 722 BCE. The first historical references to the Samaritans date from the Babylonian exile. According to the Talmud, Samaritans are to be treated as Jews in matters where their practice agrees with the mainstream but are otherwise to be treated as non-Jews. Modern genetics has suggested some truth to both the claims of the Samaritans and of the Jews in account to the Talmud. Samaritan scripture preserves a version of the Pentateuch in slightly variant forms. The Samaritans have dwindled to two communities of about 700 individuals. One such community is located in the Israeli city of Holland, while the other is located near Nablus on Mount Gerizim, in the West Bank. Today, Samaritans need to officially go through formal conversion to Judaism in order to be considered Jewish. One example is Israeli TV personality Sophie Sadaka, who was brought up Samaritan and converted to Judaism at the age of 18. Jewish sects in the Second Temple period. Prior to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Jews of the Roman province of Judea were divided into several movements, sometimes warring among themselves: Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenists, and Zealots. Many historic sources such as Flavius Josephus, the New Testament, and the recovered fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls attest to the divisions among Jews at this time. Rabbinical writings from later periods, including the Talmud, further attest these ancient schisms. The main internal struggles during this era were between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as well as the Essenists and Zealots. The Pharisees wanted to maintain the authority and traditions of classical Torah teachings and began the early teachings of the Mishnah, maintaining the authority of the Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish court. According to Josephus, the Sadducees differed from the Pharisees on a number of doctrinal grounds, notably rejecting ideas of life after death. They appear to have dominated the aristocracy and the temple, but their influence over the wider Jewish population was limited. The Essenists preached a reclusive way of life. The Zealots advocated armed rebellion against any foreign power such as Rome. All were at violent loggerheads with each other, leading to the confusion and disunity that ended with the destruction of the Second Temple and the sacking of Jerusalem by Rome. The first Christians were the original Jewish followers of Jesus, a Galilean healer and preacher. The eventual redefinition of Moses' law by Jesus' disciples and the belief in his deity, along with the development of the New Testament, ensured that Christianity and Judaism would become different and often conflicting religions. Karaite Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism. Most streams of modern Judaism developed from the Pharisaic movement, which became known as Rabbinic Judaism with the compilation of the oral law into the Mishnah. It is pervasively held that after the destruction of the Second Temple and the Bar Kokhba revolt, the other movements disappeared from the historical record. Yet the Sadducees probably kept on existing in a non-organized form for at least several more decades. A scholar named Rodkinson claimed about a century ago that the Sadducees ultimately changed their name and are those who are referred to as the Narim and Bar Alilai Mikra in the Talmud. Karaite Judaism started in the early 9th century when non-rabbinic sages like Benjamin al-Nahawendi and their followers took the rejection of the oral law by Anan ben David to the new level of seeking the plain meaning of the Tanakh text. Karaite Jews have always accepted only the Tanakh as divinely inspired, not recognizing the authority that rabbinites ascribe to basic rabbinic works like the Talmud and the Midrashim. In the 10th–11th centuries, the Karaites were believed to have comprised about 40% of the world's Jewish population. At the time of the traveler Benjamin of Tudela in the 12th century, Karaites were widely dispersed around the eastern Mediterranean, both in Islamic areas and the Byzantine Empire. Benjamin describes Karaite communities in many of the places he visited. In the early 20th century, Karaite communities remained in Egypt, Turkey, the Crimea, Ukraine, what is now Poland, Lithuania, and Israel. Today, there are about 50,000 Karaite Jews in the world, most of whom live in Israel, although the communities exist in the United States, France, Switzerland, and Turkey, as well as individual Karaites in other countries. Traditionally, Rabbinic Judaism has regarded the Karaites as Jewish, but with an incorrect philosophical understanding of the Torah. Likewise, Karaite Judaism considers the Rabbinites as Jewish but heretics. Jewish ethnic and cultural divisions. Traditionally, Judaism is not divided into religious traditions based on theological difference. However, a wide array of Jewish communities have developed independently, distinguishable by their varying practices in matters that are not considered central ideas within Judaism, such as Maimonides' list of the Jewish principles of faith. Although there are numerous Jewish ethnic communities, There are several that are large enough to be considered predominant. Ashkenazi communities compose about 75% of the world's Jewish population, and Sephardic communities and the Mizrahi Jewish communities, the Arab and Persian Jews, compose the greatest part of the rest, with about 20% of the world's Jewish population. Together these ethnic groups compose 95% of the world's Jewish population. The remaining 5% of Jews are divided among a wide array of small groups, some of which are nearing extinction as a result of assimilation and intermarriage into surrounding non-Jewish cultures or surrounding Jewish cultures. The Enlightenment had a tremendous effect on Jewish identity and on ideas about the importance and role of Jewish observance. Due to the geographical distribution and the geopolitical entities affected by the Enlightenment, this philosophical revolution essentially affected only the Ashkenazi community. However, because of the predominance of the Ashkenazi community in Israeli politics and in Jewish leadership worldwide, the effects have been significant for all Jews. Sephardic Judaism. Sephardic Judaism is the practice of Judaism as observed by the Sephardi, Maghrebim and Mizrahi Jews, so far as it is peculiar to themselves and not shared with other Jewish groups such as the Ashkenazim. Sephardic Judaism does not constitute a separate denomination within Judaism, but rather a separate cultural tradition. Sephardim are, primarily, the descendants of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. They may be divided into the families that left in the expulsion of 1492 and those that remained as crypto-Jews, Marranos, and those who left in the following few centuries. In religious parlance, and by many in modern Israel, the term is used in a broader sense to include all Jews of Ottoman or other Asian or African backgrounds, whether or not they have any historic link to Spain, though some prefer to distinguish between Sephardim proper and Mizrahi Jews. Sephardic Judaism lacks movements such as Orthodox, Conservative, or Reform. Level of halachic observance is left to each person, but none dispute that contemporary definitions of Orthodox represents the level of observance of most Sephardim. Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish synagogues are generally considered Orthodox by non-Sephardic Jews and are primarily run according to the Orthodox tradition, even though many of the congregants may not keep a level of observance on par with traditional Orthodox belief. For example, many congregants will drive to the synagogue on the Sabbath in violation of halachah, while discreetly entering the synagogue so as not to offend more observant congregants. Unlike the predominantly Ashkenazi Reform and Reconstructionist denominations, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews who are not observant generally believe that Orthodox Judaism's interpretation and legislation of halachah is appropriate and true to the original philosophy of Judaism. That being said, Sephardic and Mizrahi rabbis tend to hold different, and generally more lenient, positions on halachah than their Ashkenazi counterparts. But since these positions are based on rulings of Talmudist scholars as well as well-documented traditions that can be linked back to well-known codifiers of Jewish law, Ashkenazi and Hasidic rabbis do not believe that these positions are incorrect, but rather that they are the appropriate interpretation of halachah for Jews of Sephardic and Mizrahi descent. Hasidic Judaism. Hasidic Judaism was founded by Israel ben Eliezer, also known as the Baal Shem Tov or the Besht. His disciples attracted many followers among Ashkenazi Jews, and established numerous Hasidic groups across Europe. The Baal Shem Tov came at a time when the Jewish masses of Eastern Europe were reeling in bewilderment and disappointment engendered by the two notorious Jewish false messiahs Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank and their respective followers. Hasidic Judaism eventually became the way of life for many Jews in Europe. It first came to the United States during the large waves of Jewish emigration beginning in the 1880s. In the late 18th century, there was a serious schism between Hasidic and non-Hasidic Jews. European Jews who rejected the Hasidic movement were dubbed mitnagdim by the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, who had previously called themselves Freilich and now call themselves Hasidim. Some of the reasons for the rejection of Hasidic Judaism were the overwhelming exuberance of Hasidic worship, their untraditional ascriptions of infallibility and alleged miracle working to their leaders, and the concern that it might become a messianic sect. Since then, all the sects of Hasidic Judaism have been subsumed theologically into mainstream Orthodox Judaism, particularly Haredi Judaism. Although cultural differences persist, see the articles on Hasidic Judaism and mitnagdim for more detailed information. Modern movements or denominations. Perhaps the greatest division since the time of the division between the Sadducees and Pharisees 2 millennia ago are the divisions within the Ashkenazi community that have arisen in the past 2 centuries. Ever since the Enlightenment and the Renaissance influenced Jews from Northern and Eastern Europe. The first evidence of this great dogmatic schism was the development of the Reform Judaism movement, which rejected ethnic Judaism, and preferred to regard Judaism as a religion rather than an ethnicity or a culture. Over time, 3 large movements emerged. Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Jews generally see themselves as practicing normative Judaism, rather than belonging to a particular movement. Within Orthodox Judaism there is a spectrum of communities and practices, including Open Orthodox Judaism, Modern Orthodox Judaism, Haredi Judaism, and a variety of movements that have their origins in Hasidic Judaism. Conservative Judaism or Masorti Judaism originated in Germany in the 19th century, but became institutionalized in the United States. After the division between Reform and Orthodox Judaism, the conservative movement tried to provide Jews seeking liberalization of Orthodox theology and practice with a more traditional and halakhically based alternative to Reform Judaism. It has spread to Ashkenazi communities in Anglophone countries and Israel. Reform Judaism, also known as Liberal or Progressive Judaism, originally formed in Germany as a reaction to modernity, stresses integration with society and a personal interpretation of the Torah. Additionally, a number of smaller groups have emerged. Reconstructionists Judaism, a small, liberal Jewish movement, found primarily in the United States. It began as a liberal movement within conservative Judaism and formally separated in the 1980s. Humanistic Judaism, a non-theistic movement that emphasizes Jewish culture and history as the sources of Jewish identity. Founded by Rabbi Sherwin Wein, it is centered in North America but has spread to Europe, the Far East, Latin America, and Israel. Knowledge Judaism, a movement in the Kingdom of Hungary and in its territories ceded in 1920, which is similar to the more traditional branch of American conservative Judaism. Jewish Renewal, founded in the countercultural movements of the 1960s and 1970s. Jewish Renewal tends to embrace the ecstatic worship style and mysticism of Hasidism, while rejecting the halakhic rigor of Orthodox Judaism. Jewish Renewal congregations tend to be inclusive on the subject of who is a Jew. The Jewish Renewal movement lacks the formal institutional structure of the other liberal movements. Jewish Science, formed in the early 20th century by Rabbi Alfred G. Moses and Rabbi Morris Lichtenstein. Jewish Science was founded as a counterweight Jewish movement to Christian Science. Jewish Science sees God as a force or energy penetrating the reality of the universe, and emphasis is placed upon the role of affirmative prayer in personal healing and spiritual growth. The Society of Jewish Science in New York is the institutional arm of the movement, regularly publishing The Interpreter, the movement's primary literary publication.